Welcome to Studio 889. I'm Mo Wilks, your host. The Globe Docs Film Festival hits local theaters Wednesday, October 22nd through Sunday, October 26th. And in case you didn't know, Globe Docs Film Festival celebrates and premieres new acclaimed documentary films, bringing together filmmakers, award-winning journalists, and special guests from around the world. It's celebrating its 11th year, spotlighting these vital stories and affirming Boston's role as a hub for nonfiction film. I have the pleasure of sitting down with two of the participants in this year's film festival, Dan Algrant and Don Wright. And they actually have come together for the documentary Cathedrals. And it follows the filmmakers as they reconnect after almost 50 years in the city of Boston at the film site Cathedral Housing Development in Boston's historic South End. The Super 8 film has been described as exploring the power of human connection and creative bonds, looking deeper into what it means to be Black in today's America. And the screen's going to be followed by a Q&A with the filmmakers, Dan Algren and Don Wright, whom I welcome to Studio 889. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, thank
Well,
you for
thanks
having
for
me.
having us. Thank you
How are
for
you both
having
doing
us.
today?
Great.
Well, we're happy to be here talking to you.
Thank you very much. So, for people who do not know the two of you, can you actually please share a little bit about yourselves? Don, share a brief description of your history, and then I'll pass the mic to Dan.
Okay, well, I was raised in Boston, South End. I was raised what we call the Cathedral Projects, which is next to the Holy Cross in Boston in the South End. I was a community involved young guy, spent a lot of time doing filming projects for the Harriet Tubman House. And that's somewhat more how I became part of this documentary that I was part with four or five other guys, and we were just young guys in the project filming anything and everything that we could at that time. And I just happened to be a guy who stuck with it. But I'm now today in my life, I'm a community outreach worker, and I work with the unhoused and people who have been marginalized, and also serve a lot of people who are in recovery.
Thank you for sharing that, Dan. I'm sorry, Don. I'm going to hopefully not get those names mixed up too much. But Dan, please share something about yourself as well.
Sure. I was raised in New York by a couple of lovely people who split up very quickly and ended up being sent off to a very privileged men's prep school just north of Boston, and became interested in filmmaking and figured out a way to allow them to go to the South End and make a film as part of my, finishing up there as a student. And that's when I was introduced to Don and suggested that we make the original Super 8 film about Cathedral. And there were five guys who started. And at the end of it all, it was just Don and I really making the film together, which we did over a period of a year by the time it was finished, and showed it, this small film, 20 minutes long. It was about Kevin Thames, a boy living in the projects who'd been burned by illegal heating pipes.
Mm.
And after that, the film, which Don and I cut basically together, was shown around at different festivals in the country, did well, and I went on to, not knowing that Don had been asked to go to Andover, I went out to Los Angeles and tried to make my way into the film industry, which I did fairly fairly successfully to a certain degree. I did shows that you might have heard of on HBO, and I did some films over the years with people who are well-known actors. And then at some point in my life, I found the original film Cathedral,
Yeah, I was
and
wondering
watched
about
it.
that.
I
Yeah.
watched it during the COVID, and I thought, I was worried about a lot of things at the time. One, the way the country was moving in their feelings about communicating with each other. I watched the Floyd murder trials, which I thought deeply affected me, as they should have. And I thought back, and I found the film in my garage, the Super 8 film, and watched it, reconstituted it, and watched it, and thought, my God, this boy said all this stuff 40 years ago, and I'm sitting here watching a man get murdered on the street for 9 minutes, and what has changed and what is going on. And I said, if I took the risk at 16 years old to reach out and find Don and Kevin, why shouldn't I do that at the age of 60 and do something that I feel might matter? And also, I missed the feeling I had making the film with Don was so strong because he was such a special person that I wanted to know what happened to him. And it might, as Thomas Mann said, every individual represents his own epoch. And I felt that in some way, both Don and I and Kevin might represent that in a way that was not clear to me. So I wanted to see what we'd represent. And I went out and I hired a private detective and found Don.
So you were all teenagers at the same time? You were all the same age at 16 when you actually started this film, Don? Were you
Well,
also
Don,
16?
Don, can I answer that? Don was a young man, and I was a quite not a man. I was really a boy. I was 16, and Don was substantially more advanced in the maturity of being a human being. I was.
So Don, this teenager comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to take this camera and I want to go around Cathedral." What was your first reaction, when the two of you, or when the organization was, or the proposal was brought to you? I mean, I guess you were doing some after school stuff.
Yes. And it was brought to us, that some young guy from a school wanted to come, and he wanted to make a movie or he wanted to film with us, and
Hmm.
so I was already doing that already. And at that time in the project, there was a lot of racial tension, school busing, had started, and and there was this, communities in Boston that I, as a young black man, could not go to, and that was, happening all over the city. But for some reason in Cathedral, we did not have that
Tension.
community
Hmm.
segregation
Hmm.
idea. That didn't fly with us. We had white boys, Spanish boys, and black young men in the project that all worked together, that lived together. But outside of the project was a totally different story.
You did an over a year of filming, according to Dan. That's a lot of footage. I mean, how much footage? I mean, hours of
We
footage
we
we're talking
we
about?
we 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 filmed for about 3 or 4 months, and then it took
Wow.
about 6 months to cut the film, and we shot exactly 100 rolls of 3-minute Super 8 cartridges, which I remember looking at in a box lined up as they piled up. But it was 100 of them because I remember buying the 100 film cartridges, which cost something like $540.
Oof.
I got the school to pay for that, and that was a struggle. They called me a ubiquitous itch. That's what the headmaster called me, a ubiquitous itch. In print, he did that. But he was
And
very pleased with the film. He thought the film was actually quite phenomenal, and then asked Don to go to Andover. And they asked Don to come as a student to be just a really intelligent filmmaker or whatever he'd want to do there. And and I didn't know that really at the time because I'd already taken off for Los Angeles, and we didn't have cell phones back then.
mm,
There was no internet. There was hardly, you make a phone call across country, it costs you like $10,
yeah.
a minute.
So Don, you actually went to Andover and you didn't continue to pursue filmmaking. What I mean, what maybe led you to doing other types of community advocating versus film?
Yes. So I, was I was given that gift to go to Andover, and it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I met a lot of, people who, at some point in their life became, important people. Um, and after Andover, I went back to the project, and that's when I began my community service work. I, I was, heavily involved in community service, and a lot of it was more about trying to improve my community, and I was a very young, venturous guy, so I ventured these places where I was told where I could not go,
Mm,
could not be. As a young guy, I used to ride my bike, you know, to the ocean because I was close to South Boston.
right.
And, and then by the time I was 13, 14 years old, I couldn't ride through South Boston anymore
Mm.
because it was a threat. It was a problem, And so, but I didn't let that, discourage me, So I ventured to other communities outside of Boston, like the South Shore and the North Shore.
Hmm.
And I met people, and I used to go to these, what they called keg parties back then, and I'd be the only black
Black
face
person
in
there.
the keg party. But I can honestly say, as many of those adventures I had, I never had an issue, you know, and it must have been just because it was outside of the city of Boston. The suburb kids just weren't, trained or taught to be racist. It's a training that I know now that had happened to those young kids, because when you went to school in the seventh, eighth grade, everybody got along.
You kind of touched upon a few of the things that were going on at the time in Boston. Can you share a little bit more about your Boston, Don, and Dan, as well as like, what were you seeing? Were you seeing in that 3 month span, the changes going on with regard to those things I mentioned, busing and or just through not just the lens, but your own personal accounts?
Well,
Yeah,
can I just say quickly that the film explores that then it was a very tense time in Boston, in terms of racial differences. I mean, the North End was separated by
Hmm.
all these highways. They hadn't done the big tunnel. The
That's right.
neighborhoods were very segregated, both financially because of a lot of the banking rules and the neighborhood sort of cultures. There was a lot of violence, and the film explores what happened over the 40 years that we were separated. So the journey of the three of us, Don and Kevin and I, we take those stories and try to make some sense of them as what might have been called some kind of development of racial understanding through the country,
Hmm.
and the failure of that in some way.
Hmm.
On the other hand, we've come to a time in this country when we have been told we all hate each other, and we're being prompted to not have conversations about difficult matters. We just tell everyone what the one person, the I, thinks what should be right. And this film, our film, I think, tries to show that that is not what has to be a natural approach to living in a very diverse country and in a very diverse city of Boston first, and a very diverse country.
there are many housing projects in Boston, and the Cathedral is at a place that begins to enter downtown Boston, And so as I was growing up, I remember that we were like, I felt like we were the last stronghold
Mm.
of a diverse project where we, didn't attack each other, but we worked together,
Mm.
And because I went to school at Boston Trade, so I was right there at Mission Hill. You a white
Okay.
guy, go to Mission Hill, there's a good chance you ain't coming out.
Oh,
You a
wow.
white guy going, to Roxbury Crossing, there's a good chance you ain't coming out. And you go further
Interesting.
down the Mattapan, you really ain't gonna come out.
Yeah.
You know, and the South End of Boston was not that way. What I learned from that was that somehow I thought that I was, the steward of racial divide. That
Mm.
I wanted to, you know, show up, you know, in a white neighborhood and, you know, and say, or for them to see that I was just like them,
Mm.
you know.
How
Uh,
much of that was the fact that you were participating in this particular project, and how much of that was just you inside innately in your
yeah,
ability as well?
no, yeah, yeah. So that was more me inside because my best friend growing up in family, they were white. My neighbors in the project, they were white,
Hmm.
and in that family, they had like 7 boys, and one of the young boys was my age, and
Mm.
him and I, we rolled together. I went to a South End reunion um, last Saturday,
Hmm.
and there was an older gentleman there, older than me, probably 6, 7 years older, said to me, I remember you and your friend Richie Coombs, which was the white boy. He said you guys were inseparable.
That's so
Everywhere there
cool.
was Don, there was Richie. He defended me the
Mm.
same way that I would defend Dan at that time in 1976.
Well,
Wow.
and Richie Coombs started helping us make the film, and then I found him, and we both found Kevin Thames, who, as a 10-year-old, didn't remember being filmed.
Wow.
And when he saw I found him, I was stalking him outside of his house. He wasn't calling me back, and I found him outside of his apartment building, and didn't remember he'd been burned on the illegal heating pipes, and I recognized him because he has this huge scar on half of his
Mm.
head, and I showed him the film for the first time,
Mhm.
and he starts, if I might say, to weep as he sees himself as a child because he'd forgotten it. And both Don and I didn't show him the film. We showed the film in Andover, it was shown in Toronto, but we didn't show him the film. And a lot of our film, the story, and it's a pretty powerful story. There's a real yarn. We're telling a yarn in the story, which is why I think we're both proud of it, is getting Kevin and his family the chance to see the original film. And the three of us coming together was both difficult and for, I think, Don and I, and for Kevin, and particularly in some ways for Kevin, it made us, it reconciled a great deal. And we worked out a lot of issues that I think we're all trying to work out the best way we can.
Thank you for that. Talking with Dan Algrant, Don Wright about the documentary Cathedrals, which is going to be at the Globes Doc Film Fest. The title of the movie is called Cathedrals with an S. Were you actually talking about, the physical cathedrals that were there on site next to the housing development, the cathedral that was called the housing development, and the cathedrals
Yes,
that were also the people themselves, spiritually
yes,
inside? Were those
yes,
all the multiple cathedrals with which
yes,
you were referencing?
yes. Very much so. I mean, we didn't know what to call the film. In the movie, I talked to my brother, who's the headmaster at the school, who's married to a black woman, and my brother recently he left that job for a number of reasons. Though he's married, though he has two black daughters, he was called a racist as the headmaster. He was called anti-Semitic as a headmaster. These are the times we're living in, and what he says in the movie is, when we talk about these difficult things, we have a facilitator always there, and he always says the same thing. I want to talk. When I talk in first drafts, and everyone should have a chance to say something, and it might hurt somebody, but then you get a chance to have a second draft. And you get to listen to someone else, you get to say it in a way that might not hurt them. And that's what we call learning. You might say something that really does hurt someone. I mean, I know I have in any relationship, and Don really has, I would say, schooled me, but that sounds more derogative. I mean, he's helped me understand, and I think I him, how to speak about certain things and then listen and maybe say them again.
Appreciate that, Dan. Don, did you want to continue his thought?
Yeah. So, you were very, very correct. In my heart, cathedrals with the S has nothing to do with the church.
Right.
It has to do with every individual that survived that community at that time. I put together a Saturday grill cookout. Now, I come from that, and so I found a grill on the side of the road, cleaned it up, brought it out, put it out there on the side of the road, on the side of the downtown common, and you wouldn't believe how the community came together just behind a hot dog and a hamburger.
I only had a few more questions for you. Speaking with Don Algrant and Don Wright, when you look back at Cathedral then and now, what are your takeaways after revisiting the Boston neighborhood?
Yeah, so people would say, that things have not changed, and so I've been, trying to figure out how am I going to measure that personally. And so a week and a half ago, a week ago, I was in South Boston. I was over by D Street,
Looks
and
different, right?
yeah. Listen, my first feeling was these black folks walking around here, they got no idea. When I, you know, see a black man and a white woman walking hand in hand in South Boston, you know, listen, I'm like, hey, I did my job. I mean, because I put up with that. I put up with it. I
Yeah, there
lived
was a
through it.
time though.
You
Yeah,
know,
you're
I
right. There was a time when that wasn't necessarily a very safe thing to be able to, share in terms of your love for one another.
you can only share that downtown Boston Common because that was a neutral place.
More metropolitan
Yeah,
spaces.
you
Yeah.
can share that there. You know,
Mm.
Charlestown, East Boston, the North End. It was all the same. But really, my feeling today is that I have to give credit to change, man. I have to give credit to change. And despite that, some people still have it in their heart, the hatred, but that group is becoming smaller.
Mm.
Where I grew up, that group was the masses.
Or the most vocal.
And
You
Dan, do
know,
you share that same feeling after revisiting Cathedral? I mean,
well, Boston is a very special place in that way. I think it really does wear its heart on its sleeve in a lot of ways. And I think it's been through a great deal of struggle. But I think about the South and I think about Arthur Ashe and I think about Don in Boston. And Boston really has shown itself to be a place of real learning. I mean, there's an Asian woman mayor of Boston. Kevin is a young, lovely boy speaking out of love and childishness and trying to learn the things that become ingrained into you as you grow up, and then fighting them because in his heart, like Don says about the community of that project, and you hear some of the older folks there. They said they used to have screenings in the middle of the projects on Saturday nights, and they'd have parties and watch movies out in the yard, and it was a very different kind of environment. And I was very lucky, to meet Don, and then for us to go through the journey together over like 50 years. We've known each other now, and and I
wow.
and and we hang out
Good.
yeah.
now.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Sticking with you, Dan, did you, or both of you actually, did you have any idea what moment in history you were both chronicling? Or was it just like, hey, this is a project, all right, I'm just going to take my camera and go around? Did you guys have any idea at the time what you were actually capturing, if that's the best word to
Well,
use?
I'm going to start because I learned something from Don in this during this movie, making this new movie. He said, "You don't know what you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know." And he said to me, "You did these things, you just didn't know it, you know." And to answer your question, no, I didn't know. I had a feeling. The one feeling was that, wow, there's, and of course Martin King and James Baldwin, when you get around to it, it's not it's become about a word that they don't like to use in this country. It's about class, it's about money. That is something that we touch upon. Um, but what I didn't know, Don did know, and maybe John, you can start talking about what you do know now.
I would say no. I didn't. I did not know that I didn't know. And but the one thing that I did know is that at that time, I was trying to be involved with other people, other communities.
Hmm.
One of my favorite places to go when I was a young guy was to go to Harvard Square because they didn't have that 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 segregational concept, in Harvard Square when I was a kid growing up, Central Square,
In Cambridge,
so
yeah.
from Washington Street down to Mass Ave over that bridge, that's where I rode my bike every day because that's where I could be myself. So there has always been, you know, that barrier, and I'm just one individual that, understood at some point in my life that it was my duty, to stand on the shoulders of people who come before me, that I'm not going to be racist. I'm not going to be, prejudiced against other people. God played a big part in all that. Wasn't me, because I should have been gone a long time ago. The
Hmm.
way I was living, the way I rolled, I shouldn't be here. But the purpose was that I'm not done yet, because he ain't done with me. He's
I
not done
think
with
it speaks to, thank you for sharing. I think it speaks to the film and the healing nature of both
me.
of you. And
Mhm.
it being, even through this film, you are bringing people together. You're trying to bring people together. I only had a couple more questions,
Mhm.
but you kind of already touched upon one of the answers. I mean, what do you hope film goers will walk away with understanding? I mean, what would you like to see, Dan? Do you want people to have more discussions, more reunions, more revealing, more healing? What would you like as a positive?
Well, you've said it all. Absolutely. I hope people watch the film and first, the first rule is I hope they're pulled into a story, about us. And then I do hope that they can see the possibilities as they come every day in life, that there's someone different standing next to you. And if you just reach out your hand, you might get slapped back. On the other hand, you might make their day and
Mm.
you might learn something that you wouldn't have learned, and you might offer something that you wouldn't feel comfortable offering. And from that, we might grow as a community, because it does have, I won't tell you the ending of the story because it's a complicated story. But it does, I think, prompt a lot of laughter, a lot of smiles, tears. When Don screened the film, you know, get your handkerchiefs out because you're going to need them
Mhm.
when the tears flow. And there are moments when you do feel that way. I think people do experience that. And Don also has a purpose here that I think I won't speak for him about it, but I think that's the way I look at it.
Let me
And we've
speak to
talked
that.
about it together. I mean, no, I'm just going to say, Don, what do you think? We've talked about it. How do you want people to walk away from the movie?
Yeah, so my thought is always that line that is written or said or sung, I believe, that it makes no difference, if you're black or you're white, as long as you know what I mean, and this film is going to, put that thought in your mind that, you know, that there is no place or room for hatred. It's a waste of energy. I learned, waste of time, and we are so ingrained on being trained by that it's going to take a long time to help that diminish. It may not never go away, so they changed the word to class, and so, if I say that I went to Harvard, you know, people would look at me differently, and then I tell them, no, I didn't go to Harvard. I went to public school, and they will look at me differently, So, but I know that this particular message of community, of family, crosses all lines. Everyone will be able to identify with what we are trying to put across. That message, is so strong that the individuals of Cathedral and the families from any community, any neighborhood, it's up to next generation to break those barriers, to break those walls down, to stand up, to racism when it's being said. When you recognize it, you got to point it out. Can't let it slide, And so I just have to say that I am a steward of that, and I had to fight those battles, of what I believed. So today, the change may not be what we would like for it to be, but I damn sure know that the change has happened because I got proof. I got a documentary that shows the change. That change has happened. I got a picture of me standing under the D Street sign in South Boston. Shouting.
Yeah.
That's iconic to me. That's powerful. The people around there, they got no idea. They don't
Yeah,
know.
what that significance
They got
is.
no idea what was happening here, in 1972, 3, 4. It was, it was a long time that South Boston was segregated. Long time,
So the steward and the storyteller, Don Wright, Dan Algrant. I just have one question. I'm thinking about just leaving it right there with what you actually just said, but I think I'm going to jump into it because Dan mentioned something earlier because of the times that we're living in. Documentaries, docs depicting, um, BIPOC life. It happens not just here with what you've done in Boston, but it's happening nationwide right now. Why, Dan, are documentaries or docs depicting life important or should be? Why is it important in your eyes?
Well, I think it's a way that people feel that they can, as I said earlier, that their individual. I mean, if look, you see iPhones everywhere, so that's one
Mhm.
thing. But people who go around and really think about wanting to see the world and to be able to reflect upon it is very important. And uh, people have a great opportunity because things are much less expensive to create to do that from all different uh, places. People in the farthest outposts, people in Alaska, people in Ukraine, people as the films that just came out about the Alabama prison by Andrew Jarecki, people in solitary confinement in prison in Alabama can film their conditions and talk about their resilience to what is, I feel, in many ways, injustice. So I think it is one way that we can learn about people far away from you and see all the similarities and also see the things that we have to fix.
I like
Mm,
that.
mm,
I definitely agree with you on everything you just said. And
mm,
so I
Right.
hope that I'm sure people will be attending the Globe Docs Film Festival. Once again, it is 5 days in-person screenings across Boston cinemas, Boston area cinemas. Um, and you can check out this particular documentary, Cathedrals, Sunday, October 26th, part of the Globe Docs Film Festival. It will be showing at 1:30 and 1:30 only in Harvard Square. Just want to make sure that I point that out. But you're going to actually get a chance to meet both Dan and Don. They're going to be taking some questions and providing some great poignant answers about, I guess, 50 post years, almost 50 years later,
mm.
of how Boston has been transformed or is transforming continuously. And I definitely love the healing messages you shared, Don, and the healing messages you shared, Dan. And I'm glad that you've been brought back together to just share this with the Boston area.
And I just
Thanks
want
so
to
much for
say
having us. Yeah.
in closing that, that the opportunity came through Globe Doc Films,
Hmm.
and they were the ones that the platform that we are standing on today. So, and I invite you to come. I got a couple of tickets somewhere. If not, I'll make a ticket. But but if you show up, and I see your face. You definitely got a ticket.
Very,
Um,
very cool. Thank
you
you
know,
very, very much.
you know.
Hope
Any
to see
parting
you
words
all
also,
there.
Dan?
Hope to see you all there. Hope to see you all there. We really welcome all faces, all people, young and old, can get a great deal from this.
Thank you. Young at heart. You can also, there's nothing wrong with, finding out about, history, as you mentioned, Dan, and finding out about what's going on and around you and learning something about a different time period and, reflecting upon that and actually discussing that. As you also mentioned, sometimes you're not going to necessarily use every particular word perfectly, but you're going to actually have yourself what we used to call just conversations. And so
Right.
I
Oh,
appreciate this film just hopefully sparking good conversation.
mhm.
So
Yes.
Thank you so much. Amen.
thank you
Thank
very
Amen.
much,
All right.
Dan Algrant, Don Wright. I'm DJ Mo Wilks. Thank you very much for joining us here inside of Studio 889. All
thank
right.
you.